The Fourth Horseman by Tobias Wade. There's a stretch of ground near my hometown that everyone says is cursed. Past the lamppost that only flickers between midnight and 1 a.m. Past the gutted remains of the house which has burned down 4 times, never to be rebuilt again. Through the lingonberry bushes that are ripe all year, there you'll find it. A patch of fine powdered dirt hidden in a corpse of birch trees. The same rich earth that the rest of the verdant wilderness thrives on. Although no grass or flowers, or even the hardiest weed can be seen struggling through this blighted space. My grandfather says they used to burn witches there. Mom says that's silly and we've never had a witch, although she still warned me to keep my distance. My little brother Tommy was convinced somehow that it's a chemical spill from when the old railroad was still being used. He said he bets he could get superpowers from hanging around there, but I told Mom and she yelled at him until he promised to stay clear. Tommy was mad at me for a long time after that, even though I wasn't trying to get him in trouble. You've got to look out for your brother and keep him safe. That's what Mom always said. I had no way of knowing the truth for certain, but here's what I do know. In 1995, 2 high school boys brought switchblades to the place and ripped each other to shreds. By all accounts, they were inseparably close friends before the incident, and no one in either family had the faintest understanding of the altercation. There was speculation regarding a girl they both had eyes on, but it was impossible to confirm as neither boy survived. Again, in 2001, a newly married couple were found dead on the same spot. Double suicide. I wrote a paper on the subject when I was in school, uncovering a few more inexplicable occurrences. 1971 was the driest year on record, and to make matters worse, the local farmlands were devastated by a swarm of locusts. This was the only locust sighting anywhere within 100 miles, and after that year they were never seen again. Then there was an account of 4 men being hung in the woods in 1934, although the specific location wasn't divulged. The article said that the executioners left them up overnight, returning the next morning to discover the dead men missing. Others dismissed the event at the time as the work of wild animals, but the executioners insisted otherwise. They'd said there were 4 sets of footprints leaving the scene, clearly distinguishable since the party rode in and out of the woods on horseback. The whole strange history was nothing but an idle curiosity for me, though. Soon forgotten as I was swept up in the practical matters of school drama and preparations for college. Graduation was a rather bittersweet time for me due to my grandfather's declining health, but I'm grateful that we kept talking until the end. After I'd left for college, Tommy is the one who got really close to him. I guess they were both lonely and needed a friend, and I think Grandpa's passing was harder on him than anyone. His death didn't come as a surprise, but the circumstances of his death were truly bizarre. His autopsy revealed that he was riddled with maggots which had been feasting on him while he was still alive. The condition known as meiosis sometimes afflicts livestock in hot tropical weather, but Grandfather hadn't traveled anywhere in years and the doctor was baffled as to their origin. There was a certain evasiveness in Mom's voice when she told me over the phone, and I knew that there had to be something she was leaving out. The next week, when I came home for the funeral, Tommy confirmed that Grandpa had been taking long walks alone in the woods the last few weeks of his life. He had this idea that something in the woods was going to cure him, Tommy told me. I didn't encourage it. I never said a word about it, one way or the other. It didn't feel like my place to rip his last hope out from under him, you know? Did he go to the cursed place? I asked. He didn't talk about it. I asked to go with him, but he said it was something he had to find out for himself. Tommy's voice trailed off there. He kept blinking and halfway turning away from me. I could see how much it hurt him to talk about, but I still had to ask. What was he trying to find out? He struggled helplessly, still not looking at me when he replied. He said he met death between the trees, thought that as long as he kept an eye on death, then it couldn't sneak up on him. He tried to laugh it off, but it sounded more like a sob, so he forced a thin smile instead. Maybe he was right, though. Maybe he looked death full in the face when it took him. If it's your time to go, then I suppose there's some dignity in that, right? That's what a real man would do. I don't know if the idea brought him any comfort, but it certainly didn't sit well with me. Worse still, I got a worried phone call from Mom a few days later, after I'd already returned to campus. I don't want to alarm you or anything, and I'm not saying you have to make another trip back home, she started the conversation with, as if that was supposed to reassure me. But you should know that we're having trouble finding your brother. Finding? What the hell is that supposed to mean? You lost him? We didn't lose him. We know he's been taking these walks, but it's starting to get dark and no one has heard from him in a few hours. What kind of walks? In the woods? Not far. He usually just goes down to the end of the street where that burned out house is. I wouldn't even mention it, but Tommy has been acting really weird since your grandfather's funeral, and we're all a little worried. Strange things like seeing death in the woods. The words sounded so foreign and ridiculous in my mouth. So he's told you too? It's not like him to say things like that, but he sounded so insistent. I can be there in a few hours, I told her. Just keep me updated if you hear anything, okay? But they didn't hear anything the whole time I was driving back. Even though the sun had long set and the air was taking on a ghastly chill, no one had seen him anywhere. They'd even called the police by the time I arrived, sending a squad car to start sweeping the woods. That was a lot of ground to cover for 2 officers, though, and I had a hunch that could narrow it down. I didn't even stop long enough to greet my parents. I pulled straight up to the burned house and parked, dashing through the familiar trails. The wind was singing in the trees that night, swelling and ebbing like a well-practiced chorus. It bit through my thin school windbreaker, sharp enough for me to feel the prickling sting on my skin. Curse or no curse, I couldn't imagine a middle schooler faring well alone on a night like this. I kept seeing the glimmer of far-off flashlights flickering through the woods, but they were searching in the wrong place. When the lights caught the gnarled tree bark from the right angle, the shadows would splash across the ground in more twisted and nightmarish shapes than my imagination could supply, but I didn't let that distract me. "Tommy, get your ass back here," I shouted as loud as I could, fresh and invigorated from the thrill of my breakneck drive. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt an unnatural hush fall over the woods, though. The wind died so suddenly that it felt like I was in the presence of some colossal creature which was holding its breath to listen. I kept shouting, although not as loudly as before, my words feeling suddenly intrusive and unwelcome in the heavy stillness. Those carrying the flashlights must have heard me, though, because they were moving in the opposite direction now, doubtlessly splitting up the search to cover more ground. I kept shouting, as much to disrupt the terrifying silence as it was for Tommy's sake. Stories and rumors that I hadn't thought about in years were flooding my mind, even the most absurd explanations seeming plausible in the eldritch atmosphere. I suppose that's why I was barely even shocked when I too saw death stalking through the trees beside me. The scythe gave it away. The blade was so thin that I could see the meager moonlight glowing through its metal, although the light didn't seem to pierce the blade as much as it was trapped along its edge. My lungs were already full and I had been about to shout again, but upon seeing it the words strangled in my mouth. There was nothing particularly significant about the man holding the scythe, balding but a few tufts of hair, grubby fingers clutching the ebon shaft, the harassed features of a man unqualified for his responsibilities. It was the weapon itself that held such fascination for me, ethereal as a morning mist, yet enduring as an axiom of the universe. I don't think I've ever seen something so beautiful in my life. I froze as the man stooped suddenly, thinking myself spotted. He rose again a moment later with a fistful of ripe lingonberries. Inspecting them critically for a moment, he discarded the bunch only to stoop and harvest more. This was repeated several times while I remained perfectly still, until at last he seemed satisfied and turned to leave. I kept my distance as I followed, barely daring to breathe lest I give myself away. Any rational person would have asked him whether he'd seen my brother or tried to recruit him in the search, but all it took was glimpsing that magnificent blade to understand traditional reason was impotent in such extraordinary circumstances. I've got the berries, the best ones I could find, best ones in the whole forest, in the whole world. His words startled me, and I immediately cowered behind a tree, wondering whether I had been spotted or he had an unseen accomplice. "Master, please, I'm hurrying." False alarm, it seemed. He was only talking to himself. I allowed myself to cautiously follow once more. "I got him already," the man rambled on. "Right where you instructed me to leave him. I promise you it would be done tonight, didn't I? You can trust me. I'm a good boy. I'm a good boy, master. The best boy you ever had." "Got him? Tommy?" The man seemed so oblivious that I was able to quite easily close the distance without raising his alarm. I suppose I was oblivious too, though, so intent upon the pursuit that I didn't notice the cover of trees suddenly vanishing around me. Barren dirt saturated in moonlight. There could be no doubt that I had stumbled across the cursed place. I scrambled to dive back to the tree line and maintain my concealment, but in my haste I failed to avoid the dry branches underfoot. The crack was as loud as a snapping spine in the frozen air. "Get away," the man shouted, more warning than a threat. "Not on the hollowed ground. Don't step on the—" But I wasn't going anywhere. Tommy lay prone in the dirt, crumpled unceremoniously as though he'd been thrown. Great heaps of dry kindling surrounded him, perforated with herbs and berries, as well as other bundled objects I couldn't recognize. This could be nothing but the work of a madman. The lunatic I'd mistaken for death gave me no time to analyze the situation further, and by the rising of that baleful scythe, I was forced into action. The first swipe fell well short of me, testing his range. His wild eyes reflected the light which seemed to emanate directly from the blade, gleeful and terrified at the same time. "Hey, Tommy, you okay? Do something," I shouted, not taking my eyes from my adversary. No response. The second blow almost clipped me in the stomach, but I managed to backpedal away just in time. He'd swung too hard and was overextended, so I charged inside his range to grab the ebon handle. I was shocked when he relinquished his grip so easily, tumbling to the ground to leave the scythe in my hands. Take it, then. See what good it does you, the man howled, practically giggling to himself in his madness. The weapon was so light that I couldn't even feel its weight. The texture of the shaft was smooth to the point of slimness, like it was nothing but a vicious liquid slowly dripping down my fingers. Still clutching the weapon in case the man attacked again, I rushed to where my brother lay amid the piled kindling. His eyes were open, but his skin was ice to the touch. I felt for a pulse at his neck, recoiling as my fingers brushed the maggots which squirmed densely beneath his t-shirt. "You're okay. You're okay. You're okay," I kept repeating. I tried to lift my brother, but the maggots swarmed from hidden crevices in his clothing and body. I was so nauseated that I had to drop him again. "He's dead. Dead as a doornail. Dead as a dead monkey. As a dead man. Dead man. Dead lucky. Lucky one. That's what he is." I turned on the madman savagely, still clutching the scythe. His fingers tentatively reached out for it before he pulled himself back, a starving man reaching for forbidden food. "Not me. Not my fault," the man howled, burying his face in the dead earth. He peered through his fingers at me as I approached, glancing fretfully around him before continuing in a whisper. "Master told me so. The way is here." Open the way. Open like a box of candy, and out they pop. Precious candy. I swear to God, I hissed, not sure what to threaten or even what I was capable of in that moment. There was no one to judge me for what I did next, and even if there were, they would understand after what he did to my brother. Going to kill me? Okay. The man knelt before me, extending his neck, his rambling muffled as he spoke into the dirt. Death would like that. He needs a champion, an avatar, and he doesn't like me. He hates me, but I'm the best he's got. War has better. Famine has better. Pestilence. Oh, pestilence is going to rock the world, rock it like a baby. But I'm the best death's got. What could I possibly ask to penetrate that cloud of nonsense? All I could do was listen and pray for some clue hidden in his slurred speech. 4 worlds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Stacked like pancakes. Not pancakes. More like a jawbreaker. Not a jawbreaker either. More like a star, with Earth at the center. This holy ground is the bridge the 4 horsemen must ride. Death wants my help, but death doesn't want me. Master says. He paused, lifting his head to the wind as though listening to something only he can hear. His eyes sparkled with the eureka of his discovery. Master says you must kill me. Master says I'm all used up, and you will be the horseman of death. What came after was nothing but a blur. The madman leapt from the ground and charged at me with such ferocity that I had to dive to the ground to avoid him. Not at me, though. He was barreling toward my brother in the pile of kindling. I chased after him, too slow to stop the fire. I didn't see how it started, but it moved fast, soaring into the air to consume my brother's body. Thick clouds of noxious fumes rose from the herbs and the burning flesh, and the popping of 1,000 maggots encompassed me like fireworks. "You like that, Master?" the madman shrieked. "You didn't believe in me, but I did. But I did it. I opened the door. I had the key to your own house, Master, and I opened the door." Then turning on me, the maniacal fire filling his eyes, "What are you waiting for? Go to him. Go to your brother. To him and through to death's true kingdom. The boy is waiting. Or kill me if you're too afraid. Give death what he wants and kill me. Take the scythe for yourself. The choice is yours." For a split second, I considered braving the fire to reach my brother's body, but more than heat repelled me that night. His skin trembled from head to foot, which I first took to be the death throes of the cooking maggots, but it was his bones that were moving on their own accord. Starting with his fingers, then his wrist, and up his arms, his bones were ripping free of the skin, discarded the husk of his body to pile it into a blasphemous structure of their own design. Long bones from his legs and arms stood vertically atop each other, and as the flame plunged or purged the rest of his skin, of his flesh, the bones were left untouched. In a matter of seconds, they had assembled a low archway through which a black mist promised an alien world no mortal eye should ever look upon. Going to the house of death or getting revenge on my brother's killer, though it meant serving death himself. What kind of choice was that? Maybe, just maybe, I should just take the scythe for myself and play no part in their game.